There's a misnomer about synthetic drugs. Sometimes it's referred to as synthetic marijuana, and there's clearly suggestions out there that marijuana is not so bad. You'll never hear that from me. But there's some people out there that say marijuana is not so bad, so therefore a synthetic substance that emulates marijuana, not so bad. And so what happens is we have people out there who think, hey, here's something that we can do, that we can get high on, that's not so bad, and we can get it, it's legal. And a few years ago, some of these substances were legal. And more recently, these substances were made illegal, but certainly not fast enough. And so what's out there are these myths that these substances are not that bad. And the reality is that people are dying as a result of ingesting these lookalike or synthetic drugs. Their minds are freaking out. They're creating dangerous situations. You've seen from the video that we displayed some of the horrors that have occurred as a result of people who get hooked on these substances. And these are not just situations that we've observed from around the country. These are situations that are occurring right here in Elkhart County. We have cases currently pending that are products of the result of people who are high on synthetic drugs. And yet the vast majority of people don't even know about this. So one of the things that we want to certainly make people aware of is that this is a very real and dangerous situation occurring here in our community and our neighboring communities, and we need to pay attention and take action. Yesterday was the beginning of some action. In both Elkhart County and St. Joe counties, there were 13 search warrants executed as a result of separate investigations into synthetic drugs. But along the lines, officials from St. Joe County and Elkhart County were aware of the others, and so there has been an effort towards collaboration or coordination of events. And so while these are separate investigations, we were able to coordinate and send, I believe, a powerful message of cooperation in executing 13 search warrants simultaneously at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. I've asked the St. Joe County Prosecutor, Mike Dvorak, to be here. He may say a few comments about the St. Joe County investigation when I'm done, and then I will return for some questions that you might have concerning what we did here in Elkhart. As you know, we had a massive turnout yesterday. We had approximately 87 law enforcement personnel operating in Elkhart County, a few operating in St. Joe County for some operations that we were engaged in there as well. A list of the agencies that were of assistance in the Elkhart County situation: the Elkhart Police Department, which was the initiating agency in these actions. We had 45 officers from the Elkhart Police Department engaged in the raids yesterday. They were assisted by representatives of the Indiana State Police, the Indiana State Excise, the Elkhart County Sheriff's Department, the Goshen Police Department, the Federal DEA Task Force, the Elkhart County Interdiction Unit, our ICE unit, the St. Joe County PD, Homeland Security, Immigration, deputy prosecutors from the Elkhart Prosecutor's Office, and investigators from the Elkhart County Prosecutor's Office. So it was a massive undertaking. And what we did, and you will see by the tape, we didn't want to just go in and make arrests. We wanted to stop the problem. And we have made arrests. There's approximately, I believe there's 11 people that we now have in custody. Several of those people had made purchases, or sales rather, to undercover operatives with regard to this substance. But our targets were the people who own the operation. It's always, you've always got some people out in the clerk's area who are settling this stuff, and so we could simply go in and buy something from the clerk and make some piddly little arrest, and the operation continues to go on. But what we really have here is not just somebody selling a little bit of drugs. We have a criminal enterprise. We have people engaged in business who are operating illegal activities and putting the monies of those illegal activities back into their enterprise. That's called corrupt business influence. We have a crime for that in the state of Indiana. So we have targeted the individuals who own several of these locations, and over the course of several months and a very systematic, detailed investigation, we have culminated in the arrests of the two primary individuals that we were looking at this time, and I want to emphasize that at this time because there's going to be more to follow. But at this time, we have arrested Gurcharn Singh and Jaswinder Kaur. These are individuals who have a residence in Granger, and they are through various corporate entities, the owners and operators of 4 of the locations that we seized yesterday. We have a map here to my right which sets out the various locations that were seized here in Elkhart County, and the 4 that were operated by these 2 individuals were the one on East Bristol Street, that's a Marathon station, the one on Benham Avenue, which I believe is the Sunnyside Food Mart, and we have 2 on Franklin. That's the Marathon station on the corner of Franklin and Indiana Avenue, and about a block up the road, the Phillips 66, which again is on Franklin Street here in Elkhart, Indiana. If you go there today, you won't be going in. They're closed, they're shut down. In addition to the arrests of these 2 individuals and the arrests of the other 9 people, the Elkhart County Prosecuting Attorney's Office has initiated forfeiture proceedings against Kaur and Singh, as well as these particular locations. In addition to seizing these particular locations, we've also seized 10 bank accounts, at least 2 vehicles, $57,000 in cash at this point, and that is still that investigation is still continuing. A couple of weapons, and at least 1,400 packets of the substances that got this thing all started in the first place. This investigation is continuing. When you initiate an investigation of this magnitude, we have to draw some lines in terms of how much we can do at a particular time. So what I can tell you is these are not the only places in Elkhart County that are selling this stuff. They know who they are, but guess what? So do we. And we're going to continue to take action, and our goal is not just to stop people from selling this stuff, but it's to stop it. And if we have to take your stores, we'll take your stores. If we run you out of business, we'll run you out of business. If we need to run you out of town, we'll run you out of town. But we cannot, as a community, as communities, allow for people to profit by selling substances that are killing our youth and destroying our futures. With that, I will, and first I'd like to also recognize, aside from the St. Joe County Prosecutor, I do have behind me Captain Seymour, Chief Flipson, and Assistant Chief Cook of the Elkhart Police Department. And again, I give them credit for initiating this investigation last summer and working with my office, and also being patient with allowing us to take these proceedings to the level that they need to be taken in order to stop this problem once and for all. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Dvorak for a few comments. Mike.
Thank you, Kirst. Thank you all for coming here. Let me also pick up where Mr. Hill left off. I too want to thank the tremendous coordinated effort of law enforcement agencies in both St. Joseph County as well as in Elkhart County, and particularly thank the Elkhart County Law Enforcement Agency for all the cooperation and help they extended. The South Bend Police Department, Mishawaka Police Department. In South Bend we have the MSOS unit, which is the drug unit, as well as the Mishawaka Street Crimes unit. Our prosecutors from our office have been coordinating with prosecutors from Elkhart County, and this has been really a coordinated effort to address not only the criminal activity, but perhaps more importantly, what we consider to be a public health as well as a public safety issue. In St. Joseph County, there were 7 search warrants simultaneously served. 6 of them were on businesses. 1 was on a home in Granger. The amount of revenue recovered at this time in St. Joseph County is about $42,000. over 1,000 packets of synthetic drugs. We've also recovered marijuana, prescription drugs, paraphernalia. 9 individuals were arrested. We anticipate charges from St. Joseph County with dealing in synthetic drugs, possession of synthetic drugs, and dealing in paraphernalia. Of the 9 individuals that were arrested, we have 48 hours within which to make charging decisions, or those folks are arrested without bond. We anticipate having those charging decisions made timely. Law enforcement officers in our county were still recovering and cataloging the evidence they recovered well past midnight last night. I'm here with Amy Cressy, a deputy prosecutor in our office. She's been coordinating with our law enforcement officers. But when we're done here, we're going to have to go back to work over in South Bend, meeting with police officers, going over their reports that are being put together yet as we speak. As Curtis Hill explained, this is a very extensive investigation. It will remain ongoing. We're not going to speculate as to where this will take us. We're real confident with what we have right now and anticipate these individuals being charged in a timely period. But whether or not that takes us any further, we'll see where the evidence leads us. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have one. There's a reason this stuff is sold at convenience stores, and just from talking to excise police in the past, it's because the state licensing is different. If a liquor store gets busted selling the stuff, they lose their license, they get shut down. After the investigation is over, these places are allowed to open back up. So I guess my question, as the 2 top law enforcement officials in this area, what things are you doing to petition local lawmakers to change so that it's a uniformity, so that these places can't go back to selling the same stuff month after month after month?
Well, the one thing we're doing at this point is we're shutting them down now. The retail permits were taken as a part of the raid. Until there's a court order that's lifted, they're not going back into business in Elkhart County. With regard to what goes on in the General Assembly, clearly this issue is moving faster than our political process, because just a few years ago these substances were legal, and someone said, well, let's go ahead and criminalize it. Then the substances, at that time there was a few substances by name, maybe up to a dozen, and formulas change and they shift, and so then it's a couple dozen, and now by my estimation there's over 100 different forms of this stuff to try to keep it illegal, if you will. But the bottom line is there needs to be tighter restrictions with regard to what people sell, and also the penalties in terms of what happens when they do sell it. If you are a license to sell liquor, there's certain restrictions that need to come about that, and that's part of why we had excise as part of our operations yesterday. The excise officers are there reviewing the situation, investigating it from their standpoint, because they do hold a liquor license. We're turning information over to the Department of Revenue that deals with the retail process. So that's why what we're doing is not just simply going in and making an arrest and putting it in the justice system. We're making an arrest, but we've done a complete investigation, and wherever this leads to, we're putting that information out there so that we can shut down the entire operation.
If I might add a little bit. Both Curtis Hill and myself have been active with the Prosecutors Association, and these drugs have been called designer drugs, and they're chemically made, and he alluded to the changes in them. Recently, legislation came out that says there's authority with the State Pharmacy Board to change the name of the change the name and list of chemical compounds of the new designer drug. So those now fall under the law, so we don't have to wait each year for the legislature to identify what were the last bunch of new designer drugs that were created. The State Pharmacy Board can stay on top of it. To directly address your question about licensing, as Mr. Hills pointed out, I think the deterrent effect is going to be taking these folks out of business and charging whatever we can appropriately charge going forward, rather than waiting for any other legislative fix or any legislative change.
The example that I often cite is that a misdemeanor offense, typically, if I arrest somebody for a misdemeanor offense, and we don't want to lock people up for misdemeanors, typically they're minor offenses. So if you have an offense that's a misdemeanor or a low-level felony, it doesn't really have an impact on someone who's making serious money or engaged in a major criminal enterprise. That's why we look at corrupt business practices. That's why we look at, well, if you're engaging in business, are there things that we can do civilly to stop you from engaging in the business? If hitting you on a criminal misdemeanor or a low-level felony isn't going to do the trick, perhaps limiting your ability to make a profit will do the trick.
Was this stuff being sold out in the open, or was it something that people had asked for to get?
It's not necessarily being out in the open, but I won't get into the details of what that takes, because that is part of our investigatory process. The people who want it seem to know how to get it, and the people who sell it seem to know how to get it to them.
Just to clarify, there were 9 people arrested total within St. Joe County and Elkhart County.
I beg your pardon?
Correct? Just to clarify, there were 9 people who were arrested as a result in both St. Joe County and Elkhart County.
No, that was not the case. I think Mike said you had...
We had 9 arrested in St. Joseph County.
And there were 11 arrested in Elkhart County.
Are these people related by chance?
Well, when you say these people related, what do you mean?
I mean, are they family members?
There are some people who are family members. There are some people who are not.
Were any locations in St. Joe County connected or tied to Mr. Singh or Mr. Carr?
Yes.
What is the charge, I guess, like that carried? Obviously, the corrupt business one.
That's a Class C felony. So that's punishable by up to 8 years in prison. And we're anticipating corrupt business practices on at least 2 individuals. We're anticipating money laundering charges on several individuals, and all 11 people that we've charged in Elkhart, we anticipate charging with the actual sale of the product as a Class D felon.
In past stories that I've done on this, I know...
Pardon me?
I said in past stories that I've done on this, I know some businesses have been selling counterfeit merchandise and loose cigarettes. Was anything of that?
I didn't hear your whole question.
In past stories that I've done on this, I've known that some of these stores are selling counterfeit merchandise and loose cigarettes. Did you find any of that yesterday? I mean, what other things could you possibly find as you continue this investigation?
Well, there's all sorts of things that we may find. I mean, I think human nature being what it is, if you've got someone who is actually interested in selling this type of illegal substance openly or on the side, clearly they're interested in doing whatever they can do to make a side buck. So that's why, having seized the information that we have, that process is ongoing. This investigation will continue on just from the standpoint of understanding what we have. I anticipate it going off into other directions. So the genesis of the investigation was as a result of citizen complaints regarding these substances that were out there, and that's what we focused on in terms of the initial investigation. But as we go forward, we will be seeing other avenues, whether it's counterfeited products or something else. Certainly, this is fertile ground for potential problems.
Any ideas on who's taking these drugs? I know that it's almost impossible to test for them because of the many variations of synthetic THC. But is it predominantly teenagers, or is it adults too?
Well, from what I've gathered, it is a wide spectrum. Certainly, there's a large market for teenagers and younger folks and adolescents. But at least initially, it's anyone who's typically engaged in drug use, and that is a wide spectrum. I have not seen anything that would suggest that there's a limited number of people who might be interested in synthetic drugs. And that's part of the increased danger. And unfortunately, many of the people who are using this drug or targeting this drug as a drug of choice, many don't really recognize the harmful effects. Now, that's not to say that even if they did recognize the harmful effects, they wouldn't do it, because that's what we have in the drug culture all the time, the harmful effects of heroin, the harmful effects of methamphetamine. Many people who are on those drugs fully recognize or at least have heard of the harmful effects, and they do them anyway. So it's not to say automatically that if the drug culture is educated about how strictly dangerous these substances are, they'll stop. But we at least need to make them aware. And the other thing that we want to make sure we're doing, and we'll be doing this, my office is going to have an initiative at the Elkhart County Fair this summer where we're focusing on synthetic drugs so that we can make parents aware of what to look for with regard to what's in their children's rooms. I mean, these packets, and you've seen some of these things, they look pretty friendly. They look like things that would not be necessarily dangerous, and so parents might not be aware of the problem themselves. So part of it is making sure that everybody is aware of what's out there, along with what we're doing about it, but also getting help and cooperation from the community and the parents.
I'm sure it varies case by case, but how long does an investigation like this usually take? Are we talking days, months, weeks?
Well, as you said, it varies from case to case, and it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you simply want to send in a undercover operative to make a buy, then it takes as long as it takes to go into a store, offer some money, and get some product, which could be a matter of a few minutes. And then what do you have? If you want to build a case, if you want to build a history, if you want to examine an enterprise and how everything is intertwined and connected, and create an organizational chart to understand how this thing is growing beyond itself, that can take several months, which is what you have here. This initial investigation began in Elkhart County in July of 2013. And we have certainly since this spring have been working to connect the dot. So this is doing something of this magnitude when you're engaging in corrupt business practices as a criminal matter in terms of our processing, and when you're talking about asset forfeiture as a civil case, there's a great deal of work that needs to go into that. So months.
I know you mentioned a wide range of demographic of users who might be interested in this kind of drug. Any ideas on how many, how prevalent is it, how many people are on it?
I would have no way of knowing that. I think it's becoming more prevalent than it was. Clearly, I mean, I think we're seeing more signs of it in our other cases. That's how we typically see it. By way of example, a few years ago, I was able to start understanding that heroin had made a return back into the area, and the way we were able to ascertain that was because of seeing it in other cases or seeing it by virtue of deaths that were occurring at the hospital, things of that nature. So we observe different patterns and things that allow us to understand what's going on. Same thing with synthetic drugs. We're seeing more of it. We're seeing the results of the use of it more and more. And we typically in law enforcement will see these things before they become public. If you recall, maybe around 2000, very few people understood that there was a meth thing out there. Nobody was talking about meth in the community. Law enforcement knew about meth, but the public didn't know about meth. Go forward a couple of years, by 2004, 2005, everybody knew about meth because it had become so prevalent. So we'd like to make sure that people are aware of what's going on so that we have additional tools to be able to stop these things.
What's your largest obstacle to stopping it?
People using it. You stop the people from using it, and it goes away. That's the problem with all drug activity, is the demand. That unfortunately you have people, for whatever reason, that feel that they have a need or desire to alter their way of thinking with a substance. And as long as that demand is there, you're going to have people who will attempt to profit off of that demand. And what we do in law enforcement is we hold people accountable for that effort to profit, that effort to manufacture, to sell, to do those types of things to feed that. But if you're talking about the real solutions to any type of drug activity, there will be no real solutions until people quit using the stuff. You quit demanding it, they quit selling it, making it. So always, and that's where the awareness situations come into play. That's where part of it is if we can just get to some people to understand how dangerous these substances are, then perhaps that will have some impact on demand, and we can save a few people. Any other questions?
Okay. How many, if there's been any deaths from synthetic drug use here in St. Joe County or Elkhart?
Have there been any deaths?
Related to synthetic drugs?
Yes. In Elkhart County, yes.
How many?
I don't know how many. I can't speak for St. Joe County, but I can hazard a guess that there has been, but I can't speak for that.
The two primary individuals that were arrested that you mentioned, how many businesses do they own that were searched in?
I can tell you that there were 4 businesses that they had last night that were searched. 2 of the businesses, the ones on Main Street in Elkhart, were not connected to Carr and Singh. That's an independent situation, and we're still looking into that. So the 4 places that I mentioned, the one on Bristol Street, the 2 on Franklin, and the one on Benham, were owned by Singh and Carr through various connections. Now they
In
own
Elkhart County alone?
in Elkhart County.
What about St. Joe County?
What about St. Joe County?
Are they connected to?
They're connected to other stores there. They're also connected to stores that were not in part of this investigation. So there's a lot more.
How many businesses are they connected to in St. Joe County of the, what, 6 that were?
We're
searched?
still pulling all that together.
Okay.
Were they residing together though in that home in Granger?
My understanding is that they do live in the home in Granger together.
How, can you tell us how they are getting a hold of this synthetic drugs, these drugs?
That's a part of our ongoing investigation. Anything further?
Earlier you said that drug users aren't necessarily deterred by knowing how harmful the drugs they're using are. And then later on you said that one of the ways that you want to combat people using the drugs, stop people from using the drugs, is to let them know how dangerous it is. What other methods are you using to try to combat people, to stop people from using drugs, synthetic drugs?
Well, certainly, the best effort would be for people to understand that it's harmful, that it will hurt them physically, emotionally. That would be great. And the other thing to do is to arrest them. Now, we are not in the business of wanting to arrest people who have drug problems. That's a big myth that's out there that suggests that, I hear this, and Mike hears this, all these prosecutors want to lock up all these people for smoking marijuana. No, we don't. We want people to stop smoking marijuana because we think it's harmful for them to do so. But our goal or objective is not to lock people up for those types of things. Our goal is to get people to move on and stay away from these things. But when it's against the law, and when it continues, and when you have people who are feeding the problem, we have to take an action in some form or fashion. So while the best hope that we have is for people to wake up to the harmful effects of drug activity and stop, unfortunately, one of the avenues that we have at our disposal is accountability through the criminal justice process and what's against the law. And we try to use that judiciously as we can. Our focus with regard to drug activity is absolutely a priority on the manufacturers, on the sellers, on the organized producers, and as a last resort, we're looking at what we have to do to the actual user or the only user aspect. But our goal is to get people to stop this stuff, but that's the cost of freedom. In a free society, people get to do what they want to do, even if it hurts them.
Is there a possibility that there's an ignorance to a shopper if they walk into a convenience store and they just see it? They don't know that that's illegal if they see it in a convenience store?
I don't think that's an issue for us today. I think clearly, and I can even back up a little bit just so you understand how this worked. This investigation didn't begin by law enforcement simply going into these locations and making clandestine buys. You want to know how it started? It started by law enforcement going into these places and saying, you know what? This stuff that you have here is illegal. So we would suggest that you stop selling it. Because if you keep selling it, then we're going to have to come here and do something about it. That's called a warning. So that tells you right there the objective here is not to just go ahead and lock people up, disturb their businesses. The idea is maybe they're ignorant, like you said. Maybe they just don't know. So an effort was made to go out to all of these locations that were seized. All of these locations that were seized had that same opportunity. Every one of those locations had, some of them had several hundred packets that were just seized, taken, and no action taken. And guess what? After those warnings, we go back in, and they're still selling them. This time, not so openly, not so brazenly, but still selling them. Now, what do you do now? Now you've got somebody who's, okay, I'm not ignorant anymore. They cleared their ignorance. So from that standpoint, we take further steps. And let me say this, I always need to make sure I say this because it's very important. The individuals that are arrested, both in St. Joe County and Elkhart County, are innocent until proven guilty. We have amassed a great deal of information and evidence, but in our system, these folks are all afforded an opportunity at trial. So it is very clear that we understand that distinction. They have been arrested. My office will be considering formal charges within the next few days, consistent with what I've talked to you about today. But they are innocent until proven guilty, notwithstanding anything that we've talked about here today.
So I know you can't find exact numbers on how prevalent this is or how many people use it, but in terms of comparing it to other drug abuse locally, how much of a priority is synthetic drugs, or how much of a problem is it, you think?
Well, I think it's growing in use, and it is becoming certainly a focus. I hesitate to get into prioritization because prioritization is in the sort of like beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. It depends on who's on what. If you're on meth, maybe priority is meth. If you're on heroin, maybe the priority is heroin. So I think it's becoming a focus because of its increased prevalence, its apparent ease, and really its danger. There are some folks who want to say, well, we shouldn't be looking at marijuana. Marijuana is still a focus for me because I think that marijuana is a dangerous substance. Is it as dangerous as this substance? Not so, because of how this substance is created with regard to the chemicals and what we're seeing as a result. So, you know, you're getting into the apples and oranges type of thing. I think the focus has to increase on this because this is kind of sliding in under the radar as being okay. You've got pictures of cartoon animals on packages and little cute little packaging that would suggest that it's okay, and it sends a pretty significantly false message, and that's why we need to get that message out there. Now, if you know that it's nasty and you still unwrap the cute little package, well, that's on you, but at least we can tell people that that cute little package has some nasty poisons in it. Anything else?
Curtis, for all of the facilities that you serve warrants on, are all those closed and shuttered?
Are all this closed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because they're and boarded up, so they're all 5? Or?
Well, I don't know if there's any boards up on the windows, but they are under the control of the Elkhart Police Department and will be until further court order. Every time I ask, somebody has another one, so I'm just waiting. We done? Heather has packets, if you didn't get every little juicy detail. And thank you for coming.